My name is Ryan. I'm 27 years old, and every Christmas with my family has always felt like a performance. On the surface, we were the picture of tradition: decorated tree, gifts lined up by the fireplace, the smell of cinnamon rolls coming from the kitchen. But if you peeled back the wrapping, it was just another stage for my parents and older brother to remind me of my place in the family. I was the youngest, the one who never measured up, the one who got the bare minimum, while my brother, Derek, got everything handed to him. That particular Christmas morning started like any other. My mom fussed over the turkey that wouldn't be eaten until dinner. My dad flipped through the sports section, pretending not to notice the mess of wrapping paper at his feet, and Derek slouched across the couch, holding his mug of coffee like it was a crown he deserved. I was sitting in the corner chair, legs tucked under me, trying to just blend into the background the way I usually did when I was home. It didn't last. Derek caught sight of me, grinned, and in that way only he could, turned his attention into a weapon. "Merry Christmas, little bro," he said, walking toward me with his steaming mug. I opened my mouth to say something polite, maybe even genuine, but before I could, he tipped the cup forward. The coffee spilled across my lap, hot enough to make me flinch and jump up, leaving a dark stain spreading across my pants. "Consider it a gift," Derek sneered. "It's the only one you'll ever get." My parents didn't gasp, didn't scold him, didn't even look concerned. My mom actually chuckled behind her hand. My dad shook his head like Derek was some comedian. The living room filled with their laughter, and in that moment I felt 12 years old again, standing in the same spot while Derek unwrapped a brand new gaming console and I got a $5 bill stuffed into a card. Some things never changed. But I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even bother to clean myself up right away. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 things behind it, and quietly excused myself to my room. My family probably thought I was sulking. That's what I always did. But this time, something was different. I closed the door behind me and sat at my desk, the one spot in that house that was still mine. I pulled my laptop close and typed in my login for the online account I'd been checking every so often over the past few months. Because here's the thing. Derek's prized possession wasn't the designer jackets he flaunted or even the new Rolex he'd flashed around Thanksgiving. It was his car, a sleek black sports car that my parents had co-signed for and titled under my name when he couldn't qualify for it himself. He liked to joke that I was just his paper shield. What he didn't realize was that the shield had teeth. As my parents' laughter floated faintly through the walls, I clicked through the forms. My heart was pounding, but not out of fear, out of clarity. Every belittling comment, every time they'd brushed me aside, every holiday where I was treated like an afterthought, it all funneled into that single moment. I filled out the transfer, the final confirmation glowing on the screen like a spark. I didn't even hesitate. By the time the sun began peeking through the blinds, my hands were steady. I could almost hear Derek's voice in my head, bragging about his car like it was the only thing that gave him status. I leaned back in my chair and imagined him stepping outside, expecting to show it off as usual, and finding nothing but an empty driveway. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of control. And that was just the beginning. When the morning light finally stretched across the curtains, I heard Derek's heavy footsteps pounding through the upstairs hallway. At first, I thought he was just being his usual obnoxious self, stomping around to make sure everyone knew he was awake. But then came the slam of the front door, followed almost immediately by his voice, loud, panicked, and echoing through the entire house. "Where is my car?" I stayed upstairs, my hands resting on the desk, fingers still tingling from the adrenaline of the night before. From my window, I could see him standing barefoot in the driveway, his robe flapping around him as he spun in circles like someone had stolen his crown. My parents rushed outside, half concerned, half confused, and I heard my mom's shrill voice float up through the window. "Derek, sweetheart, what do you mean it's gone? You probably just parked it wrong. Don't scare me like this." But Derek wasn't calming down. His voice cracked as he shouted, "It's not parked wrong. It's gone. Someone took it. Someone stole my car." I could hear my dad trying to reason with him, though his tones sounded more annoyed than helpful. "Calm down, son, calm down. Maybe you left it at the bar last night. You did come home late." That suggestion only made Derek snap harder. "No, I drove it home, Dad. I parked it right here. Don't you dare suggest I lost it. Someone took it. I swear, if anyone touched it." His voice dropped low, seething. I sat back in my chair, listening to the chaos unravel. For once, the sound of Derek's meltdown was like music to me. But the best part was still ahead. He didn't know the truth yet. By the time I came downstairs, he was already red-faced, pacing the living room, shouting about calling the cops, his robe hanging off one shoulder. My parents were gathered around him, soothing him like he was 5 years old who'd dropped his ice cream cone. "Don't worry, honey, we'll figure it out," Mom cooed, brushing his arm like he was the victim of some great tragedy. I walked past them quietly and poured myself a glass of water. Derek snapped his head toward me, eyes blazing. You know anything about this?" The room went silent, all eyes on me. My parents' faces were expectant, but not in the way that implied they suspected me. Instead, they looked like they already assumed I was guilty, just by default. I hadn't even said a word, and yet I was already on trial. I sipped the water slowly, keeping my face calm. "Know anything about what?" "Don't play dumb with me, Ryan." Derek barked. "My car is gone. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? Tell me now." My mom folded her arms and gave me a look, the same one she'd given me 1,000 times when Derek broke something and blamed me. "Ryan, if you know something, now would be the time to be honest. This is serious." There it was, the old family script. Derek plays the victim, my parents leap to his defense, and I'm cast as the suspicious outsider, the easy scapegoat. I had been assigned that role my whole life, and they slid me back into it like it was my costume for the day. I shrugged. I went to bed early. Didn't hear a thing. Derek stomped closer, his finger jabbing the air near my chest. "Don't lie to me. You've always been jealous of me. Everyone knows it. If you did something to my car, I swear." "Derek," my dad interrupted sharply, though not out of defense for me. More out of irritation that Derek was spiraling too loudly. "Sit down. We'll handle this." But Derek wasn't done. He pointed straight at me and hissed. He had to have something to do with it. "He's pathetic, and this is exactly the kind of low stunt he'd pull." The words didn't sting like they used to. Instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I realized then that nothing Derek said could hurt me anymore, because I already had something far sharper in my pocket: the truth. Mom leaned toward me, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Ryan, if you know where the car is, you need to tell us. Don't make this worse for your brother." There it was again, worse for Derek. Not, "Don't make it worse for the family," or "Don't get yourself in trouble." No, the only thing that mattered was Derek's comfort, Derek's happiness, Derek's perfect little world. My role was to either help maintain it or be blamed when it cracked. I looked at all three of them, their faces twisted in expectation, and forced a small smile. "I don't know anything, but if it's really missing, maybe you should file a report." Derek exploded. He cursed under his breath, stormed toward the phone, and started dialing the local police. My mom shot me a glare like I'd just kicked a puppy. My dad sighed and muttered about how I always bring trouble into the house, even though I'd said barely 10 words. I sat down at the kitchen table, watching the scene unfold like a movie I'd already seen 100 times. Derek ranting, my parents consoling him, and me, always the silent villain in their narrative. Only this time, the story wasn't going to play out the way they expected. As Derek raved into the phone, threatening lawsuits and demanding the cops send someone immediately, I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. I knew exactly where the car was. I knew exactly who held the power in that room. And for the first time, it wasn't Derek. The police didn't rush to our doorstep like Derek demanded. They told him to file a report online first and bring in any documentation he had about the car. That only made him angrier. He slammed the phone onto the receiver, stormed back into the living room, and shouted at all of us like we were personally responsible for their lack of urgency. My mom, of course, rushed to soothe him. "Oh, honey, they just don't understand how important this car is to you. Don't worry, we'll handle it." She turned her head toward me then, narrowing her eyes. "Ryan, go upstairs and grab your laptop. You can help Derek with the paperwork." I blinked, incredulous. Why would I do that? "Because," she said flatly, "you don't have anything else going on. It's Christmas morning, and your brother is in crisis. Family helps family." Family. That word was like a knife, sharp and twisted. Family had never been about me. It had always been about Derek, protecting him, building him up, shielding him from consequences. Family was the excuse they used to drain my college savings for his tuition, the justification for why I got secondhand everything while he got brand new. Now they were using it again to make me his secretary. I didn't move. My silence was enough to set Derek off again. Unbelievable, he spat. You're seriously going to sit there while my life is falling apart? You're useless. Always have been. Always will be. Something inside me clenched, but it wasn't sadness. It was resolve. I wanted to tell him exactly how wrong he was, to lay out everything I knew, but I kept my mouth shut. He wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. That's when my dad entered the picture. He wasn't usually the type to get involved unless things were really spiraling, but the tension in the air must have pushed him over. He pointed a finger at me and said, Ryan, you're going to help your brother. End of discussion. I won't have you sitting around smirking while he suffers. Do you understand me? Smirking. That was the word he used. Not refusing, not ignoring, but smirking. Because in their eyes, my silence was mockery. My calm was guilt. My existence was an offense. I didn't say a word. And that silence? That was what broke everything. My dad walked across the room, grabbed my wrist, and yanked me up from the chair so hard my glass of water toppled onto the floor. His grip was iron, his face just inches from mine. You will sit down, log in, and help your brother find his car. If you don't, you can get out of this house and not come back. My mom gasped like he'd gone too far, but she didn't stop him. Derek stood there smirking. The same smirk he'd worn when he accidentally locked me outside in the snow as a kid, or when he told everyone at Thanksgiving that I was still single because no one wanted me. That was the breaking point. Not the coffee, not the laughter, not the accusations. It was my father's hand crushing my wrist, and that ultimatum, help Derek or leave forever. In that instant, something inside me snapped. I yanked my arm free, my voice steady but shaking at the same time. You want me gone? Fine. But when I walk out that door, don't you dare call me back when you realize what you've done. They didn't understand what I meant. They couldn't. Not yet. But Derek's smirk faltered, just for a second, like he'd seen something in my eyes he hadn't expected. That was the moment the balance of power shifted, even if they didn't know it. Because I wasn't the helpless scapegoat anymore. I was the one holding the string that could unravel their little world. And soon, I would pull it. I didn't wait for them to say another word. I went upstairs, every step heavier than the last, my father's ultimatum replaying in my head like a drumbeat. Help your brother or leave. It wasn't even surprising, not really. I'd always known where I stood with them, but hearing it spoken out loud, on Christmas morning, no less, was a kind of clarity that both burned and froze me inside. In my room, I shut the door and leaned against it, staring at the childhood posters that still hung on the walls. They looked ridiculous now, relics of a life I thought might one day be valued by the people downstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing the red mark on my wrist where my dad had grabbed me. It didn't hurt physically, not much, but it pulsed with something deeper, betrayal that had finally boiled over. The voices downstairs carried up through the floorboards. Derek was ranting about how the cops weren't doing enough. My mom was fretting about what the neighbors might think, and my dad was pacing like he could solve this with sheer volume. My name kept popping up in their sentences, always attached to suspicion, always dripping with disappointment. Ryan should have helped. Ryan must know something. Ryan is probably behind this somehow. I sat there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I considered what it would mean to actually walk away, not just in anger, but permanently. To pack my bag, get in my old beat-up sedan, and never look back. No more holidays where I was the punchline. No more being the scapegoat. Just freedom. But then the fear crept in. Where would I go? I had an apartment back in the city, sure, but it was small, barely more than a box with a mattress. The idea of never speaking to my family again felt like cutting off a limb, even if that limb had been poisoning me for years. Part of me still wanted them to see me, to finally recognize that I mattered. That's what made it so much harder. Hours passed. I heard them sit down for Christmas dinner without me. Plates clinking, laughter forced, but loud enough to make a point. No one came upstairs to ask if I was joining. No one checked to see if I was okay. I was invisible, just like they wanted me to be. By midnight, the house had gone quiet. I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was turning too quickly, replaying every insult, every time Derek had been praised while I was dismissed. My dad's grip on my wrist. My mom's disappointed glare. Derek's smirk. And then, like a whisper in the back of my mind, the thought returned. They don't know what you've done yet. I sat up, pulling my laptop onto my knees. The confirmation screen from earlier was still up, the transfer complete, Derek's car no longer legally his. That was my anchor, the one piece of leverage I held in a house where I'd never had any. It didn't erase the sting of what happened, but it steadied me. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a card to play. But I didn't rush it. No, I knew better than that. If I'd learned anything from years of being their scapegoat, it was patience. Derek would keep digging his own grave. My parents would keep showing their favoritism. All I had to do was wait, keep my head down, and let them underestimate me, just like they always had. Still, that night was the lowest I'd ever felt. Alone in a house that never felt like mine, the echo of their laughter still hanging in the air, I realized there was no going back. The boy who used to beg for scraps of their approval was gone. In his place was someone colder, sharper, someone who would never again settle for being their punching bag. I wasn't ready yet, but the plan was beginning to take shape. And when the moment came, they'd never see it coming. I drove back to the city the next morning, my car packed with the few things I had brought home. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Derek barely looked up from his phone as I carried my bag down the stairs. My parents didn't even bother with a goodbye. It was like I had already been erased from their version of family. And honestly, that stung more than I wanted to admit. The drive was quiet. Snow still clung to the shoulders of the road. The world hushed in the way it always is after Christmas, but inside me there was a storm. Part of me felt like I had failed again, like I had let them push me out, just as they always wanted. But another part of me, a deeper part, was burning with something different. I wasn't running away. Not this time. I was stepping out of their shadow for good. Back in my apartment, I expected the loneliness to hit me like it always did. Instead, what came was focus. My little one-room space, with its second-hand furniture and rattling heater, suddenly felt like freedom. No one was watching me. No one was mocking me. No one was waiting for me to fail. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't oppressive, it was mine. I buried myself in work. My job wasn't glamorous. Entry-level at a tech firm where I spent most of my time fixing other people's mistakes, but I threw myself into it with a kind of hunger I hadn't known before. I stayed late. I asked questions. I learned the systems inside and out. I became the person people turned to when they needed something done right, and slowly, people started noticing. My boss started noticing. Promotions don't happen overnight, but by spring, I had moved out of the entry-level pool and into a role with real responsibility. The pay was better, but more importantly, the respect was different. People listened to me. They sought out my input. Every nod, every good job, was like water to a starving plant. Outside of work, I finally had the courage to take risks. I'd always been interested in investing, in building something of my own, but back home, every idea I shared had been laughed at. Derek once told me I'd lose a fortune before I made a dime. I carried that voice in my head for years. Now, free from it, I finally opened that brokerage account I'd been too afraid to touch. I started small, cautious, but I studied hard. The late nights that used to be spent replaying arguments with my family were now filled with charts, books, and forums. And slowly, the numbers started to grow. By the end of that year, I wasn't rich, not yet, but I was stable in a way I had never been before. My savings were solid. My investments were moving in the right direction. At work, I had earned another promotion, this time with my own small team to lead. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the weak link. I was becoming someone worth reckoning with. And then something happened that sealed my resolve. One Friday evening, as I was locking up my computer, my boss stopped by my desk. He was a man who rarely wasted words. But that night, he looked me in the eye and said, "You've got potential, Ryan. Don't waste it trying to prove yourself to the wrong people. Build something for yourself." The words hit me harder than I expected. He didn't know my story, didn't know about the coffee incident, the years of favoritism, the way my parents had shoved me aside. But somehow, he had named exactly what I needed to hear. I had been wasting my energy for years trying to get people who would never respect me to see my worth. Now, finally, I was building a life where I didn't need their approval. It was around that time Derek reached out for the first time since Christmas. A short text, nothing more. "Hey, need to talk. Call me." I stared at it for a long while, my chest tightening. The old me would have felt dread, guilt, maybe even a spark of hope that he wanted to reconcile. But the person I was becoming? I saw it for what it was, an opening. Because while my life was climbing steadily upward, Derek's wasn't. And soon enough, he and my parents would find themselves in a situation where, for once, I would be the one holding all the cards. The text from Derek lingered in my mind for days before I responded. I didn't ignore it, but I didn't rush either. Old habits wanted me to jump, to prove I was still part of their world, but I forced myself to wait until Sunday evening. I sent a simple reply, busy. What's up? The phone rang within minutes. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity outweighed hesitation. Derek's voice came through the line, thinner than I remembered, stripped of its usual swagger. Ryan, hey. Listen, I need a favor. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, letting him squirm. A favor? Yeah, it's nothing big. Just, things are tight right now. I've got some payments stacking up, and well, I figured since you've got that desk job, maybe you could spot me a little until I sort it out. The irony nearly made me laugh. Derek, the golden child, the one who sneered at my boring city life, asking me for money. My silence stretched long enough for him to rush into excuses. It's temporary. I've just had some bad luck lately. Work's been slow. And, Mom and Dad can only do so much. There it was. He had already leaned on them. And if Derek was calling me now, it meant the well at home was running dry. I'll think about it, I said flatly, and ended the call before he could protest. That night, I dug deeper. I still had the paperwork on his car saved in my files. The transfer from Christmas morning hadn't just taken the car. It had put me in full control of the title. Derek hadn't realized it yet, probably too busy blaming thieves and incompetent cops, but legally, that car was mine. But that was only the surface. Over the next week, I started making calls, checking records, and using every resource I had quietly built up in my new life. What I found painted a picture of Derek's unraveling. He was behind on rent for the luxury apartment my parents had co-signed for. He had maxed out not one, but 3 credit cards. His job at the dealership wasn't steady anymore, and from the looks of it, he was living more off appearances than actual income. And the best part? The sports car wasn't just his prized possession, it was also his last safety net. Without it, his finances were hanging by a thread. The more I uncovered, the calmer I felt. Every document, every overdue notice, every desperate voicemail he left in the following days was like another piece of armor sliding into place. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. My parents started reaching out, too. First, my mom with a sugary voicemail. Ryan, sweetheart, your brother is going through a rough patch. We know you've always been the responsible one. Maybe you could help him get back on his feet. Then my dad, more direct. Your mother's worried sick. Do the right thing and take care of your brother. That's what family does. Family. Always that word. But this time, instead of feeling small under its weight, I felt stronger. They weren't calling me because they loved me. They were calling because Derek was failing, and for the first time, I had what he needed. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I poured myself into work even more. By midsummer, my team had delivered on a major project that landed us new clients. The company rewarded me with a promotion into management, a raise big enough that I moved into a better apartment, one with space, light, and silence that felt like power itself. And while I was climbing, Derek was sinking. Word trickled back to me through old mutual friends. The car was still missing. The cops had dropped the case months ago, and Derek was furious about their incompetence. He had borrowed money from the wrong people. He was drinking more. He was fighting with my parents constantly. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Every holiday picture they posted looked more strained, their smiles thinner, their clothes less new. They didn't invite me, of course, but I saw it all from the sidelines. And with every glimpse, I knew my patience was paying off. Because revenge isn't about one strike. It's about setting the board, piece by piece, until your opponent doesn't realize they're trapped until it's far too late. By the end of the year, I wasn't just in a better place. I was in the strongest position I'd ever been. Financially stable, respected at work, connected with people who valued me. And in my desk drawer, still waiting, was the final document that tied Derek's fate to mine. The car title with my name stamped across it in black ink. I didn't need to rush. Derek's downfall was already in motion. All I had to do was choose the right moment to tip it over the edge. And that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. The call came on a Thursday evening in late autumn. I remember because I was sitting in my new apartment, eating takeout at my dining table, something I never had room for in the old place. when my phone buzzed with my mom's number. Her voice was sharp, panicked. "Ryan, it's Derek. He's in trouble." I leaned back in my chair, chopsticks paused in my hand. "What kind of trouble?" She hesitated. Then her words tumbled out fast, desperate. "He's about to lose everything. His landlord's threatening eviction. The collectors are calling day and night. And his car. Well, you know how important that car is. If he can't get it back, he has nothing. Ryan, please. You've always been the responsible one. You have to help him." There it was again. Not "we need you." Not "I miss you." Just "he needs saving." And in their eyes, that was my job. I let a long silence hang before I spoke. "You're asking me to fix Derek's life? Again? Don't say it like that," she snapped, then softened. "We're a family. Families take care of each other. You have a good job. You're doing well. It's time you stepped up." Step up. That phrase dug into me. I thought about my father's grip on my wrist that Christmas morning, about Derek's smirk, about every holiday where my name was synonymous with disappointment. And suddenly, the time felt right. "I'll think about it," I said, and ended the call. The next morning, I printed out a copy of the car title. My name was still there, bold and undeniable. I placed it neatly into a folder, slipped it into my work bag, and drove to my parents' house that Saturday. The driveway looked different this time. Derek's flashy car-shaped void had long been filled by a beat-up sedan with mismatched paint. The sight of it almost made me laugh. Inside, the house smelled the same. Roast beef and lemon cleaner, but the energy was different. Derek was slouched at the kitchen table, thinner, tired, eyes rimmed red. My parents hovered around him like anxious satellites. When I walked in, all three heads snapped toward me. My mom rushed forward with a brittle smile. "Ryan, you came. Thank goodness. Your brother really needs you right now." I sat down at the table without a word, pulled the folder from my bag, and laid it flat on the table. Derek's eyes flickered down, confusion knitting his brow. "What's that?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Your car," I said simply. He blinked. "What do you mean, my car?" "It was stolen." "Not stolen." I slid the title toward him. "Transferred. On Christmas morning. You remember that day, right?" The room went dead quiet. My mom's hand froze mid-gesture. My dad's jaw tightened. Derek snatched up the paper, his eyes scanning furiously, his lips moving as if he couldn't believe the letters. When he reached the end, his face drained of color. "You," he started, but his voice broke. He tried again, louder this time. "You did this? You stole it from me." I leaned back, calm, steady. "No. Legally, it was never yours. Remember? You couldn't qualify for the financing. Mom and Dad had it signed over to me as a technicality. You bragged about it at the time, called me your paper shield. You just never thought the shield had a choice." My parents looked like statues, their eyes darting between us, mouths slightly open. Derek slammed the title onto the table, his hands shaking. "You ruined me. Do you have any idea what I've been through because of this?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "I do. I've lived through it my whole life. Every time you mocked me, every time you pushed me aside, every time they laughed at me instead of standing up for me. You dumped coffee on me last Christmas and called it a gift. So I gave you one back." The silence that followed was thicker than anything I'd ever felt in that house. My mom finally whispered, "Ryan, how could you?" But even she sounded uncertain, like she wasn't sure who the real victim was anymore. Derek lunged forward, jabbing his finger at me. "Fix this. Give it back. Right now." I held his gaze, then slowly shook my head. "No." The word landed like a hammer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking under their stares. I was the one holding the power. And Derek knew it. His face twisted, fury and panic mixing into something almost pitiful. My dad started to speak, but the words caught in his throat. My mom's hands trembled at her sides. And me? I just sat there, calm, steady, watching as the truth finally began to sink in. The golden boy wasn't untouchable anymore. And I wasn't the scapegoat. Not anymore. Derek's rage spilled over in an instant. He shoved the title back across the table, nearly knocking over a glass. "You think this makes you powerful? You think this is funny? You ruined me. I'll sue you. I'll drag you into court and—" "You won't." I cut in, my voice calm enough that it startled even me. "Because everything about that car is airtight. My name's on the title. I made the payments after you fell behind. I covered the insurance when you couldn't. You don't have a leg to stand on, Derek. Not legally. Not morally." For a moment, he was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like he was gasping for air. Then, his eyes flicked toward my parents, searching for backup. Mom? Dad? Say something. He can't do this to me. My mom's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. My dad finally spoke, his voice low, almost defeated. Son, he's right. The car was never really yours. It was like watching a mask fall off Derek's face. For years, he'd been the golden child, shielded, praised, excused. But in that moment, his own parents couldn't protect him anymore. He stumbled back into his chair, his hands raking through his hair, his voice cracking. This isn't fair. This isn't fair. I stood, slipping the folder back into my bag. Fair? That's rich. You never cared about fair when it was me on the receiving end. You laughed. They laughed. And now you want mercy? I shook my head. Not this time. My mom reached out, her eyes glistening, but I stepped back before she could touch me. Ryan, please don't do this. We're family. That word again. It almost made me laugh. Family isn't supposed to hurt you just because they can. Family isn't supposed to laugh when you're humiliated. You made it clear what I was worth to you. Consider this my answer. Derek looked up, eyes wild, desperate. So what now? You walk away and leave me with nothing. I met his gaze and let the silence stretch before answering. No, Derek. You left yourself with nothing. I just stopped carrying the weight of it for you. The room fell silent. For the first time in my life, no one interrupted me, no one dismissed me, no one laughed. They just sat there, stunned, powerless, finally seeing me for who I was. I turned and walked toward the door. My father didn't move. My mother's quiet sobs followed me. Derek muttered something under his breath, but his voice was too broken to carry. Outside, the air was cold, crisp, almost biting. I walked to my car, the one I had earned, paid for, and owned in every sense, and slid behind the wheel. Through the window, I could see them standing in the kitchen, three small figures framed by the light of the house. For once, I wasn't the one left behind. I started the engine, the sound cutting through the silence of the street. And as I pulled away from that driveway, the one where I had always been the shadow to Derek's spotlight, I felt lighter than I ever had before. That Christmas, they gave me coffee, laughter, and humiliation. I gave them silence, truth, and loss. And it was the only gift they'd ever truly earned.